Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Paul Bristow and I'm joined by my colleague John Shallow. I'll start with the good news. We're not going to kill you with PowerPoints. We've tried to keep them to the absolute minimum. And hopefully we'll have enough time at the end for a decent question and answer session. Before we start, I just want to give you a couple of minutes of who Webscreen are. Webscreen has a long pedigree in the DDoS space. We originated DDoS mitigation technology back in 2000, so we are widely accredited with providing the world's first DDoS solution, and ever since those early days we've been focused on R&D, product development and product support. We are not a sales or a marketing organization, and many people here today will have probably never even heard of us, but as you go through the slides and as we go through the slides, hopefully you'll get a feel for who we are.
We never forgive, we never forget, expect us. We are none.
That is simply to get your attention. I think most people in the room will be familiar with Anonymous, and a lot of people think Anonymous are kind of a modern day thing from, the last year or two, but there are people in the front row already shaking their head going, we know more than that. The DDoS milestones, what we're going to do in the next 3 or 4 slides is just give you a feel for where DDoS originated from, how long it's been going, and some of the noteworthy events that demonstrate to all of us how widely used DDoS is today. It's gone from being a little niche form of attack to something today that is used in all sorts of strange ways. Let's have a look at, that's where the problem starts. And back in 2000, large organizations would have been taken offline. In those days, the attacks would have been volumetric. They would have been SIM floods and the like. Those companies were taken offline for the most part for extortion, although there was a degree of kind of bragging rights that you get in any sort of security arena. And at this point in time, it's probably worth looking at that. That's a very, very good example. Way back in 2000, people were using DDoS as a method of protesting. Back in 2000, that was actually a hacktivist group protesting against somebody doing crop development that was kind of a little bit, I suppose, unnerving to some of the left-wing people. And that obviously is us. Now, before I go on to the next slide, can I just have a quick show of hands? Thank you very much for your quick show of hands. Who works for an organization today that does not have a disaster recovery plan? Thank you very much. So we've got a decent audience here today. We've probably got about 50, 60, 70 people. There are 2 people in this room who do not have a disaster recovery plan. And I would imagine most of the people here not only have a disaster recovery plan, but you invoke it, you test it at least once a year. And yet, DDoS mitigation technology is all about preventing that outage. It's all about, if you're an online business, it's all about keeping you going, just in the same way that disaster recovery is. So, another quick show of hands. How many people here, actually, their business or their organization today has DDoS mitigation? So I've got 1, I've got 2, I've got 3. I'm not going to ask you any questions, you're safe. You can all put your hands up if you've got it. So we've got probably 4 or 5 people here who have got DDoS mitigation technology, and the rest of you don't. Which is fine, that's good, because that's the world that we live in. I'll crunch through these. In the beginning, it's all about extortion. DDoS and extortion went hand in glove. Today, that's not quite the case. Today, you don't really see too much in the way of extortion. You see it in perhaps some of the kind of Balkan states. You see it in some of the emerging countries. You see examples of it in India. But you don't really see it in Europe as much. In fact, very rarely, and the same in America. In 2003, the first DDoS proxy service was launched, and that really was aimed at the gaming market where most of the extortion was going on. And it's one of those happy coincidences that the early DDoS services offered by the proxy companies cost, well, what did they cost? They cost about as much as the extortion demand. And, you know, I think that's commercial influences at play there. That is the first time anonymous surfaced on a widely credited basis. So you're going back a good 5 years. And here you have two clear examples of this growth of DDoS. DDoS has moved from being extortion. It's moved from hitting gaming sites and pornography sites and sites with a large revenue stream. And it's now being used as a form of protest, and it's now being used by member states to hinder and block the communications of other countries that they've got a quarrel with. And that's not the only example. I could fill countless slides with examples of state use of DDoS. Another example of anonymous, that I think is one of the most significant examples that you'll see on the milestones. There you have got people coming together using social media, be it Facebook, be it Twitter, and they are taking their protest forward using DDoS. They are basically making a request to a website at a specific time. And we see later on in some of the slides more powerful examples of that in a commercial sense. But you had a very good example there where the public at large felt that they'd been cheated. Whether they had or not, it's not for me to say. But their way of protesting, rather than throwing rocks and bricks and doing the normal stuff, was to basically take the Iranian news service offline. And we'll show you later just how easy it is to take a major website offline with as little as 50 requests per second. So, what is interesting about this is, in those earlier slides, there was gaps between the years. There was maybe jump from 2003 to 2006, 2006 to 2008. We could fill 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slides with the incidents that have happened in 2010 and 2011. And at the point that PayPal and Visa were taken out, DDoS had been around for 10 years. It was well known. It was well understood. Visa and PayPal had quite sophisticated DDoS mitigation technology. But unfortunately for them, their technology was based around volumetric attacks, the old SIM floods that basically started the whole game rolling back in 2000. And when we move on to the slides concerning attack vectors, you'll see that there has been a shift in the way people attack. Yes, we do get volumetric attacks, but that's not where the action is at the moment. And I think it's worth asking yourself this question. If PayPal and Visa, with all of their resources, all of their money, all of their technical advancement, if they can be taken out, how safe do you feel? And there's only 5 of you put your hand up to say you've got DDoS mitigation technology. They had it, and they were taken out. So, let's have a look at some of the enablers. Now, one of the problems with this is that clearly we don't have the time today to drill down and down and down. We're more than happy to have offline discussions with anybody, and clearly they're confidential. We don't discuss what we do with other people. I've said early on, back in that kind of Iranian protest movement, that the chat rooms, the forums, social media, and you've seen this now with the Wall Street protests where they've moved away from using things like BlackBerry messaging where you can be tracked down. And there's a lot of... Vibe was never designed to do or be used in the way it is. It's simply another messaging service, but it's a messaging service that is completely anonymous. You select the distance that your message is broadcast, and you select the amount of time that your message stays live. So you can set a parameter that says, this message is only going to go out for a mile. That's its parameter for travel. And it will only stay live for 5 minutes. And that's a good way of people in that game keeping one step ahead. And that's what we spend our time doing. We're always in a case of constant catch-up. We find a way of fixing things, everything moves on. We find a way of fixing things, everything moves on. But I think the biggest role that social media has been about the dissemination of information. I could point you to countless hacktivist websites that will give you all of the knowledge that you ever need to go and start your own little DDoS warfare. It's sad, but it's true. This is just one example. Again, I could have given you plenty of others. It is what it says it is. But the question back to the audience is, why would 250,000 plus, probably relatively young people, download a network stress testing tool? How many teenagers are in the bedroom testing networks? They're not. It's being used as another means of getting more bang for your buck from your DDoS attack. And I think it's probably also worth pointing out, in its present guise, if you're not really, really cute about what you do, it actually leaves your IP address. But 250,000 people don't seem to give a toss. They're more interested in attacking you than they are in getting caught. And it's through the footprints that it leaves behind at the moment that some of these people have been arrested. You saw the young guy getting arrested in Essex. And botnets. The botnets are going exactly the same way that everything does. There's almost a Moore's law at work there. They are becoming bigger. They are undoubtedly more powerful, and they are cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And again, we can take you to websites where you can literally try and buy. It's a bit like Asda, it's a bit like Tesco. They'll be doing a buy one, get one free soon. You can literally buy one by the hour. Everything that applies in the normal commercial world applies to the botnet herders. They are there to make a living, and they respond to the times. And the other interesting thing is, if you combine the first two things together as a protest group, you in essence have got your own botnet capability. You take 100, 1,000, 5,000 people, you pull them together via social media, you give them low orbit ion cannon as a tool, they download it, it's absolutely free, and then at the appointed time, you make a request, all of you collectively make a request to a URL. There is a very good chance that you will take that service offline. So, let's have a look at some of the attack vectors. It's a fact. They are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There was a time, and we've got a great customer base. Our customer base spans emerging online retailers through to huge organizations, banks and government departments. And we do see an increase in the attack size, but there is a corresponding decline in the number of volumetric attacks. That's where the action is. And this is all about somebody knowing full well that there are URL requests that they can make that will cause real pain. And a live example is a very large UK retailer where you could, through the main URL, access their whole price list. The price list had literally thousands upon thousands of SKUs. Each one of those stock lookup codes has a part description, it has a corresponding stock level, etc., etc. 50 requests per second took that whole service out because the people who were on the site at the time trying to fill their basket to check out couldn't do so because it's the same database server that allocates the stock levels that is now busy. And there are countless variations. You can do that with postcodes. You can do with it, give me my delivery status. If you find a back-end weakness in somebody's web service, you can simply make the back end so busy. And you're not going to write a rule into a firewall or any other kind of rules-based appliance that says, do not allow more than 50 requests per second from this IP address. Do not allow more than 50 requests per second to this URL. Because in doing so, you would literally cripple your normal flow of business. And what we've spent the last 2 years doing is adding more and more and more granularity to what we look as a resource. Back in the day, a resource would simply be a server. We would be protecting a server or a firewall or some physical appliance from being overloaded. Today, our definition of resource has become so fine that it literally can be anything that you can measure, anything that's finite. So a singular URL request to us now is a resource, and we track that resource, and we control that resource. So you could, in this now example, you could go to that website and start hitting the price list. And we would see that resource getting busy, and we would start rate limiting that resource whilst letting every other single URL request come through. So we can take it down to that level of granularity. And I'm sure there must be people here familiar with services like Akamai and Limelight. Now, there you've got a global IP address with lots and lots, hundreds, thousands of IP addresses sitting behind it. And the attackers are not, they're clever people. They will launch an attack from behind. And what they're looking to do is put you in a position where you can't turn off that single Akamai IP address or that Limelight IP address, because in doing so, you wipe out all of the other good traffic coming through the other IP addresses. And we've developed a technology that allows you to look beyond that. Again, another level of granularity. So we see beyond that, we see the originating IP address, and we start to rate limit and modify the behavior of that particular IP address coming through the global IP address. And that's what I'm talking about there. Don't think of a resource as a server. Don't think of it as a physical appliance. It's anything that you can attack, anything that will cause the back end to go busy, anything that will cause a degradation in service. So, if you look at our customer base, our smallest customer has 3 staff. There is this myth that DDoS technology costs hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands. That's a nonsense. Our smallest customer has 3 staff. They turn over less than £500,000 sterling. They're a specialist online clothes retailer. The other end of the extreme, our largest or most prestigious customer has a turnover of 7 billion sterling. 7 billion. So, and we've got everything in between. But the one common denominator is every single one of those people cannot afford to be offline. They can't afford the economic impact. We have one retailer who, and I can't go into it because it was a bit too obvious, but they make a lot of money by having sale days. And they've moved the sales online so you don't have to pitch up at the shop at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. They take millions in a 24-hour period, millions online. If they went offline, somebody would be sacked. No ifs, no buts, somebody would go because the economic damage is so big. And, you know, you don't need to be making money for this to be a problem. You can be the BBC, providing a news service. Classic examples are every time there's a problem, the government brings out a website because it's cheaper than actually fixing the problem. So you've got flu. Well, I tell you what, It's cheaper to put up a website to tell you what to do with avian flu. But what happens to it? It lasted, I think, 4 hours and it crashed. It was actually an example of flash crowd rather than being DDoS'd. And you had the same, I think you saw recently with the police website, where you could put in your postcode and you could look up how much crime was happening on your doorstep. Lasted about 6 hours. You don't need to be earning money for it to be a problem. And I'm talking to the converted here. You know there's an immediate impact for going offline, but then there's also the invisible costs. That lack of customer confidence that you've suddenly pushed out there. The fact that you've got to then go into promotions to win those customers back. And you'll never get them all back. It's just a fact of life. You won't. So, it's pervasive, it's growing, it's a real problem. You need to do something about it. Let's go through 3 options. It's an easy option. It costs you nothing. You don't need to do any research. You don't need to talk to people like me. You're home and dry. I'm not sure that's a better choice, to be perfectly honest with you, because that takes that type of old school thinking about volumetric attacks and says, if I oversize everything, so I've got a normal committed data rate of 100 megabits per second, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get myself a gig pipe, and I'm going to have that gig pipe burstable. So if I really do get a big attack, I'll be fine. And I'm going to get myself some bigger switches and some bigger routers and more. I'm going to get some bigger load balancers, and I'm going to get some bigger servers. That's brilliant if you're prepared to throw that type of money away. It's also brilliant if it's a volumetric attack. But if you get hit by a slow and low attack at 50 packets per second, what good's your big fat pipe? It's no use whatsoever. And apparently, I have it on good authority, these exist. They do everything. They're fabulous. You just need to buy one and you're done. It's a firewall. It's an application firewall. It does IDS, it does IPS, it does DDoS. And I would imagine if you paid the right money, it'd probably be T's made as well. They don't work. We pick up 20, 25, sometimes as much as 30% of our annual business comes from a phone call with somebody on the end panicking. I'm offline. Okay, and then you go through all the normal stuff, and you find out they've got DDoS technology, in inverted commas. One of the biggest customers we've got came to us today because they were offline for one of the biggest sporting events in the British calendar. They were offline for all of the days of that event. And they had put a lot of money and a lot of time into picking some clever technology that ticked all the boxes. Their losses ran into hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. And it just doesn't work. These do work. These do work. I'm not going to sit here and give you any sort of propaganda on which is the best. You need to make that decision for yourself. And then you can also completely ignore getting that type of technology because you can get it by doing that. All of the proxy providers use some or all of that type of technology. They route your traffic, they cleanse it, and they send it back to you. Now, I'm kind of agnostic about proxy service. I think there is a place for them, and I think they do a good job in the right place. But most of the proxy providers will bang on about how big and how fat their pipes are. They'll tell you we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of capacity. And they have. They've got data centers all over the world. The question you should ask them is, what is your cleansing capacity? It's all well and good you having hundreds of gigs of bandwidth, but if your scrubbing center will only handle 10 million packets per second, you've got an Achilles heel that you really need to discuss with them. And it's suggested that they can reroute your traffic in minutes. If you are already signed up to them, they'll do it in hours. If you're not signed up to them, it absolutely, take it as read, takes days. And then you're back to the economic discussion about how much money can you afford to lose. This is new. It's our product. We're the only people in the world doing it, so I'm not going to give you any propaganda on that. All I will say is it shows promise. It's out in the field. Customers are using it. And we are optimistic about what we can do with that going forward. And I'll literally leave it at that. So, 5 people put their hands up to having DDoS protection. Nearly everybody said, we've got DR capabilities. So the first thing you need to do is you need to start looking at this. And I know I'm preaching to the converted. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here. And if we can help you in arriving at a decision, we'd be delighted to do so. Many of you will have your services hosted, either in part or in totality. You need to go back to them. Don't have a discussion. Don't have a phone-based discussion, because you'll fall into the trap of he said, she said. Get it in writing. And that's just common sense. It's just common sense. You need to know what they've got and how they go about it. And if they don't, I think you've got 2 stark choices. There are plenty of hosting providers. The biggest growth in our business today is coming from service providers, people delivering software as a service, hosting organizations, etc., etc. There is not a week goes by without us engaging with somebody in the service delivery space, be it managed services, whatever. So there is plenty of choice out there. If they don't give you the choice, they don't give you the option, go and talk to somebody else. Clearly, some of you here will have your own data centers, or you'll have your own equipment co-load. Pretty much the same description. You need to look at your network from a topology point of view and see whether there are any weaknesses. You need to have burstable capacity. If you don't have burstable capacity, please, 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 go and get it. It's nothing to do with us. We're not in that game. But you need burstable capacity. If your committed data rate is 100 megs, you need to have some headroom to soak up volumetric attacks, because whilst they're on the decline, they are getting bigger, and you need that bandwidth to soak it up. And then talk to people like us. Talk to people that provide some of the other technologies. There is a lot of good DDoS technology out there today, and I would urge you to take up client references. So, in summary, there is just a wall of evidence that not only is DDoS growing in popularity, growing in use, growing in sophistication, all the evidence, both from people like us and from government agencies that are actively monitoring what's going on in this space, tells us we're going to see super botnets, botnets made up of servers. We're going to see SSL attacks. We're going to see just this constant development, and it is already the choice attack vector for anybody protesting. And we see loads of commercial disruption, where we will get a phone call. The attacks typically come through on a Thursday or Friday. It's just the way it is. And they typically, the first time attack will last 2, 3, 4 days. The people we were talking about earlier, the very, very small specialist clothes retailer, they came to us. They had been offline for over a week, and their website was up and it was down, and they changed this and they moved that, and they catch up with you. They're not good at this for no reason. So you're going to see more of it. And if you don't think, and this is a stunning example of the way the game's changing, if you don't think it's going to happen to you, let me give you an example from only 6 weeks ago. When I was growing up, football fans that were, not so happy with the other club, they would throw things at the team bus. They would chant insulting songs. If you're a Millwall fan, you'd probably invade the pitch. We got engaged with a customer 6 weeks ago, football club, famous football club, one of the biggest going. Their website had been taken offline by opposing fans. They wanted to stop them selling tickets, which it did do, wanted them to stop them selling merchandise, which they did do, and for a lot of football clubs today, their TV streaming, they're their own TV station, and all big ones have this kind of thing. That's a great revenue earner, and if you're playing in Europe, it's even better. And that thing was DDoS'd to hell. And, you know, as we got involved in it, we had to work literally through the night to keep that because they were changing the vectors all the time. And, you know, if a football club's going to get DDoS'd by football fans, don't sit there and think you're not going to get DDoS'd, because somewhere down the line you will. So have a look at what your options are. It is not as costly as you might think. There are more and more players coming into the proxy service. People like us have got more and more options, and the whole thing is becoming more and more economical. Honestly, like anything to do with technology, there is more nonsense than fact, but the fact is easy to find. And you need somebody with a track record, and given that the attacks typically start on a Thursday or a Friday and go through the weekend, and the attacks are coming in from everywhere. When we're tracking the IP addresses, trust me, they are everywhere. They're from all of the Far East nations, Arabic nations, all of the Central European nations and the Balkans, and they are just bouncing around. You need 24/7 support, and you need that support to be good, because it's not easy. We are thrilled that there's so many of you here, thrilled and shocked in equal measures. I thank you all very much for your time. If any of you want to get any more information on this, we'll provide it totally off the record. It will be as impartial as we can be. We don't have any salespeople. My marketing manager's somewhere at the back, but we're not brilliant on marketing at the moment. We're more into research and development. And just get in touch with us. And if we can help you, even if it's pointing you in the direction of one of our competitors, we'd be happy to do so. Thank you all very much for your time.